Welcome to the Civil Service World podcast. In this episode, we're talking about the future of workplace learning in government. We'll talk about the skills which civil servants will need to thrive in the workplaces of the future and explore how to start building those skills in your teams and for yourself. The discussion was recorded on the 30th of September and chaired by me, Suzannah Brecknell.
Good morning, and welcome to this Civil Service World webinar, in which we'll be discussing trends, challenges and opportunities for workplace learning in the civil service. I'm Suzannah Brecknell, Editor-in-Chief of Civil Service World, and I'll be chairing the discussion today. The webinar is being hosted in partnership with KPMG, and I'm joined today by Mike Zealley, Managing Director of Learning Services at KPMG, Louise Scott-Worrall, Head of Learning Services at KPMG, and Tamsin Cooper, Managing Director of the Forward Institute. Having already had a pre-discussion with these three people, I know you are in for a very interesting chat today. We've got a real spread of expertise and very interesting perspectives on what good workplace learning looks like. Good leadership development looks like, and what we as individuals, teams and organisations need from workplace learning, and how we can get there. So before we get to the meat of that discussion, let's find out a little bit more about the panel. I'm going to ask each of them in turn, and I'll start with you, Louise. Can you tell us, how did you come to be on a panel discussion discussing workplace learning in the civil service?
Thanks, Suzannah. So as well as the work that I do across UK government, which I have done almost for 10 years now in support of government skills across various departments and professions, I'm also, I lead our people services practice across KPMG in infrastructure, government and healthcare. So really bring that kind of workforce insight as well as the learning insight. So delighted to speak to you all today.
Thanks. Tamsin, do you want to go next and tell us how you came to be here on this discussion?
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. So I'm the Managing Director of the Forward Institute. For people who don't know who the Forward Institute is, we are an organisation, a leadership organisation. The civil service was actually one of our founding partners 10 years ago, alongside some institutions like the British Army, the Bank of England, Barclays. There was a collection of organisations that came together that believed in this notion of responsible leadership. So we have worked through leadership development programmes with thousands of leaders over the last 10 years, including a sizable set of senior civil servants that either come on our leadership development programmes and work cross-sectionally in that context, and with our work that we do at the core of government departments. My background is as a civil servant, so this is a topic that I've seen from both sides of the table, so to speak, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for joining us, Tamsin. And Mike, do you want to round us off and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Wonderful. Good morning, everybody. A pleasure to be here this morning. So, as Suzannah said, I'm Mike Zealley. I'm the Managing Director of KPMG's Learning business. My background over the years, I've worked across sectors in with and for government as well, on a range of roles, transformation. But the common theme has always been around building people capability. I firmly believe that the only way you make sustainable change happen is by having the right people and talent to enable that to be embedded. And I also look after our relationship with government skills, and I've spent the past 10 years with my colleague Louise working across government departments and professions to support the government campus. Lovely to be here today and great to see everyone.
Thanks, Mike. And you mentioned, I was almost wary of saying at the beginning, we're in a time of great change, but of course that will be a fundamental part of our discussion, how workplace learning can help us to thrive in change, to drive change, all of those connections. Before we dive into the panel discussion, there will be time at the end for an audience Q&A. So I do invite you, those of you watching or listening from home or office, to use the attendee chats function, which I think is on the right of your screens, to drop questions in for the panel. I'll kind of keep an eye on it, and if you drop me something that is immediate, asking what did that mean or tell us more about this, I'll try and bring it in, but we'll also make sure we save time at the end. So make the most of the expertise that we have on the panel today and drop in your questions. So topic today, as I said, trends, challenges, opportunities in workplace learning. Before we think about that, I wanted to first think about the workplace itself. Mike mentioned the C word, change. There's lots of change ahead for workplaces. Can I ask the panel to reflect on the kind of key challenges and trends that you see in the context of work in the civil service? Maybe, Mike, can I ask you to start us off, since I started with Louise last time?
Yeah, sure. I think what I'm about to say, we'd probably all recognise, and I don't think it would perhaps come as a surprise, but I often feel that we're in a bit of a perfect storm at the moment. There's a number of factors that are coming together in the workplace, and this is not just about the civil service. This is about every organisation around the world as well as in the country. I think we're all still feeling the effects of impact of hybrid working, of different workforce models, different ways of working in the workplace. And I think we're also seeing ever increasingly rapidly moving technology. I was struck by one of the phrases Trudeau said at Davos some years ago about change has never been faster and will never be this slow again. And that certainly for me feels very, very true. And then when you set that against the sort of the macroeconomic uncertainty, it really is quite tricky, I think, for leaders and managers to navigate the course through that particular conundrum, that trilemma, if you will. What we believe, and certainly what I get very, very passionate about, is that it's vital now to make sure that people have the right skills and knowledge to keep pace with that, but also manage that uncertainty. I think the playbook for managers and leaders has changed in recent times, and perhaps we can touch more on that later. But I think my overarching point, coming back to what I said at the start, is this isn't just a question for the civil service or the workplace. It's a national issue. There is a fundamental challenge around the skills in this country that we need to actively support and develop.
Thanks. Louise, anything to add before we come to Tamsin?
Yeah, just to build on what Mike said, really. So I absolutely agree. This is not just a civil service issue. We know, obviously, civil servants are their key focus is to implement the mission-led government. However, I still think we're getting to grips with what I'm going to talk about, kind of the new norms. So hybrid working. I don't think, we're completely there on that. People are still evolving to it. How do you lead teams where you don't see people? And we know in the civil service, there can be a large span of control. So it's establishing that new normal. Mike mentioned technology. So, of course, massive technological change. But along with that, civil servants need to think about risk. They need to think of compliance. So I think they're really important things that civil servants need to think about. And then just generally thinking about the workplace, I think it's now that we've got 5 generations of different types of people in the workplace. So that generational diversity, which we absolutely need, because we need that diversity of thought, but it just makes the workplace a more complex place to navigate.
That's really interesting. And I guess those 5 generations, they've all got different skills, different experience, and different needs and different preferences on how they will build the skills they need. Exactly. So certainly one we can pick up. Tamsin, what would you kind of add to that around future of leadership in civil service, the kind of context for them?
Yeah, thanks. So, to build on the points of the rest of the panel, I think there is universality in the macro context. So it is obviously true that whatever organisation, whatever sector we're in, there is a disproportionate amount of uncertainty. But I think there are also some bespoke elements that are, key to the civil service. I was at a conference, I think it was 2 weeks ago, that Nesta had organised around public service reform, where, Gus O'Donnell and other perm sets, current and previous perm secs, were there. And actually also what they were talking about in terms of, in addition to this sort of macro complexity, there is a sort of real material imperative for public service reform that reflects both the growing need in the country and demand for public services, and an imperative to reform because of a sort of particular political and growth dynamic in the UK. So I think that civil servants are grappling with those issues that are unique to them, as well as that wider context. To pick up on something that Mike said, clearly uncertainty is the name of the day of all of these different things and drivers that converging is important. I think that, we should reflect on the past 5 years of the civil service. So there is an imperative for resilience and thinking differently towards the future. But that comes off the back of 5 years that started with an EU exit referendum, that went through COVID, that went through a period of uncertainty with a multiple, many changes in political leadership, both within and across different parties. So the system is coming through a process, a period of quite extreme stress, and then is hitting against the uncertainty of the future. So that combination of factors puts a real imperative on leaders for how they are leading their teams, how they are setting the direction, and how they are, helping the very different workforce along the way. And we can dig into some of those sort of attributes and characteristics of leadership and what leadership development needs to do. But that would be my take on the contextual factors right now.
Thank you. Is there anything, we've already touched on it, I guess, Louise, with your mention on the generational spread. Is there anything any of you would add on the workforce of the future? If we kind of believe some of the hype, it's going to be all robots. And I have a lovely joke about a robot and a dog from a cartoon in the 70s if we've got time at the end. But what about the workforce of the future? What would you like to say about that before we start thinking about what the learning needs might be?
Yeah, so my hope is that we can kind of get to a balanced workforce where human intelligence is augmented by agents. And actually, what do we need to be there for? The humans need to be even more human. And I was at the LPI Learning Live a couple of weeks ago, and a couple of the speakers were therefore saying we need to be even more human and maybe a bit less filtered. And the analogy that they were giving is that kind of that impetuous, the energy of being childlike, kind of, until you're 6, kind of you believe you can do anything, and then kind of as you mature, inhibitions kick in, and they're saying actually if you've got to be even more human, then maybe you need to be more creative, more imaginative, and less constrained by kind of the art of the possible. The agentic can augment that and can help with some of the routine and process. And then the other thing again about being really human is that our empathy has got to be our superpower. So we need to be even more empathetic. And I am hearing rumours, and they are rumours, that the kind of, the robots are going to have all our jobs is kind of tipping slightly. So if you think about some of the professions where, you learn your trade by doing some of those more junior tasks, if the agentic workforce does all of that, then the humans won't have that knowledge. They won't have those fundamental skills. So that's why I say that my hope is that it's balanced. So 100% there is a great role for agents. There's a great role to support, but the workforce definitely does need to be balanced. And our 2024 CEO survey last year said that 83% of CEOs said that they didn't think that robots would be taking all of our jobs. So that's good news as well.
Yeah. Mike, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'd very much agree. I think on that point particularly, it's very much about augmenting, not replacing. I was actually discussing this at a debate at the House of Lords a couple of weeks ago, and my personal view is I think we're starting to break clear a little bit of the hype phase around things like generative AI. I think there's increasingly more data research and evidence, and I'm an engineer and scientist by background. I like data and evidence to make sure we're making properly informed judgments. There are definitely good examples now of where people are adopting AI into the mainstream of the workplace, both the general tools and the specialist tools. And there's also indications of some of the areas where it can have a positive impact in terms of the outcome. So my belief is it's definitely going to change the way we work. It's definitely going to change jobs. But I don't personally subscribe to the view that we're going to be replaced by robots. That I think it's more a question of what will we do with that extra capacity, and perhaps, as Louise said, maybe we can spend it being more human and doing the things that the technology tools can't do so well. So that's certainly my hope. That's the world I tend to fight for. So
you've got a panel of optimists.
Yeah. Do you want to come in and be more optimistic? Do you want to throw any challenges in around it? What would it be like to lead this workforce that needs to be more human?
Thank you. So, I mean, I think it'll be sectoral specific. So I think there's a nuance in all of this in terms of, which sectors and which business models will be impacted more than others. And I think it's at the moment quite hard to predict. You have to, as Mike said and Louisa said, you have to navigate the hype, because if you spend the time thinking about, reading some of the predictions that are out there, obviously there's a lot of doom around it. So I think that my optimism starts from the premise that I think that technology is a driver of growth, and we need, as a country, we need routes to growth. There are the levers of growth in terms of trade, in terms of immigration, and in terms of, some of those levers, because of the politics around us, are less available to us. So to think about technology rooted as a driver of growth and as a driver of public service reform and efficiency, I think there is a lot of potential to be optimistic in that regard. You asked, Suzanne, about a question about leadership, and we think that this is fundamentally a leadership challenge rather than a technology challenge. And to bring that to life a bit, I think it will be incumbent on leaders to take the sort of thoughtful choices around technology deployment, about the safeguarding of values and the values that underpin the choices, the belief systems, the values, the perception of the type of society that we wish to be in. There will be a leadership challenge in terms of the transformation of the workforce, how people are included on that transformation journey, so they're given the skills and capabilities to be part of the technology transition rather than being left behind it. So all layers of from a transformation perspective, from a workforce inclusion perspective, for a vision for the type of organisation and the type of society that we are seeking to create. I think that is where the technology interfaces with leadership and puts a real imperative on the leadership required to do that transformation work.
Thanks, Tamsin. So we've got a context there, I think, around the workplace, the workforce, around these kind of sector-specific challenges, as well as the universal challenges that we're all facing in our workplaces. I want to before we get a little bit more into the trends in terms of skills and so forth, I wanted to think about the sort of technical part of leadership learning, workplace learning. Sorry, and Mike, I know you're a whiz and an expert on this sort of thing. Can you give us a sense of the sort of the trends you're seeing, some of the practical ways that workplace learning is developing or being delivered in government?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I think the first thing to say is government is a broad and diverse place. When we're talking about an audience that's everything from prison officers, benefit centre colleagues, diplomatic service, I think 46 professions, thousands of organisations. It's a whole sector in its own right. So I think you have to recognise and embrace that diversity in any strategy you build around workplace learning. That said, I think there are common threads that affect all organisations that we've certainly seen in the data over the past 10 years and some of the shift. So let me just reflect on some of those. I think the first is people are really busy. Time is scarce. And one of the things that we hear a lot from learners, each year we conduct a big survey of learners who we work with, tens of thousands of learners, hundreds of thousands of learners come in on that. And one of the things we hear consistently is they just feel they don't have time to learn. Learning is seen as an alternative to working, which I think is really interesting, because actually I think the best way to learn is to work and to actually apply that knowledge to develop your skills. But what's been the response of the system in this respect, I think, is to have much more on-demand learning, more learning in the flow, if you will, in the flow of work, or as my colleague Louise would say, in the flow of life, because I quite agree. It's very much about integrating all of that these days. So I think people want to be able to access the learning they need now, when they need it, not in 3 months' time, in 6 months' time. And clearly there's different learning for different requirements. I think the second thing that comes through in the data is very much the expectation of those who are learning. And I think the development of life and society is such that people expect more personalization. They expect a consumer grade experience. When I want to learn things at home, I expect that very personal touch, and I have all of my tools and how I like to learn, and friends and colleagues who I learn from as well. And certainly I believe that that's the case in workplace learning as well. People will go to the place that's easiest for them to acquire the information and the knowledge they need. They will work as groups and develop more widely. But two facts for you. We ran a survey last year looking specifically at the question about where people go to learn. And I was quite surprised that across both private and public sector in the UK, 60% of them were now saying they were going to their favourite generative AI tool to learn workplace skills, because it was so much more convenient than going to their corporate LMS, and it had the stuff they needed and they could talk to it. So I wasn't at all surprised actually to see in Google's Gemini product that they've now added a guided learning feature, so you can just have a chat about what you want to learn. And I think for those foundational skills and knowledge, that's going to be a thing I see coming in the next few years, much less of the corporate LMS, much more of the on-demand and convenience learning. And I was chatting to a lady called Dr. Philippa Harben, who's probably one of the leading learning scientists in the country. And certainly her research was showing that learning is probably one of the largest use cases, not so much the creation of learning, although there is a value there, but for people to acquire what they need to do the job. And that's because I think jobs are changing and work is changing. So you need to constantly be topping up. The third trend, and I think this is really, really, really important. I've definitely seen this in the civil service, and I'm delighted by it. It's about unlocking the knowledge and expertise that's already within the workforce. Now, the civil service and government have amazing experts in them, and I'm really, really pleased to see that there's been that growth in learning that's created internally and shared amongst colleagues, supported by communities of practice where people can then exchange over time their hints and tips and really continue that journey. The learning science very much shows that continual reinforcement and that peer learning is absolutely fundamental. So a big fan of that, and I very much commend the work of government skills and other departments in helping make that happen. I guess the other thing is that there are some universal areas. Everyone's really interested in digital skills and data skills and cyber skills, of course, but as Tamsin and Louise said, I think the human skills are very much at a premium as well at the moment, and perhaps we can touch on some more of that later. But I think something we see at the moment is very much the rise of supporting our line managers to be effective in helping guide the workforce through these challenges. I think in many organisations that's been, perhaps in the previous decade, neglected a little bit over other areas of learning. So it's really great to see that line management come back to the fore as well. Lots of other things I could talk about, but I think those would be my summaries there.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and such a wide range. You've got let's get it on demand and more quickly, let's get it from AI, but let's also do it in community with expertise who are humans. It really encapsulates, I think, this theme that's coming through about we have to embrace tech but be more human. because you've mentioned skills, and one of the first questions, thank you to Pfizer for the question around what skills are priority, which we can pick up a bit later, give you time to think about that. But I hear often the phrase skills-based organisation, and I would like to unpack that a little bit and kind of talk about what that means to each of you and what it looks like in practice to build an organisation that's skills-based. Could I, Louise, do you want to come in first on that?
Yeah, thank you, Suzannah. So for me, a skills-based organisation is one that's really kind of looking forward. It's rethinking its workforce planning and therefore its skills and learning strategies around capability frameworks and skills of their future workforce. They can use that skills knowledge and insight to allocate work to tasks, not people to roles. And that then is augmented with the agentic workforce. The other benefit of being a skills-based organisation and knowing the skills and capabilities in your organisation is that then you can have that untapped potential. So you can access skills and capabilities that you might not know that you have got in your organisation. So you don't have to recruit, you might have somebody that's already got their skills and capability in your workforce. Often one that is asked for is a particular language skill, for example. So, where are the, at the time, Ukrainian speakers, within the civil service. So the more skills led you are, the more skills based you are, then you can have at your fingertips, these are the people in the organisation that have those skills, or here's the agentic workforce that has that capability. And if you want to build a skills-based organisation, there are probably 4 things that you need to think about. The first one is speak the same language. So you have to have a shared skills and taxonomy to avoid any ambiguity. The second one is know your strengths. So use diagnostics that assess human and AI readiness at a task level. That goes back to allocate work to tasks, not people to roles. Absolutely, the third is technology. Exactly as Tamsin said, it's a huge growth driver for us. But enable with technology. Implement platforms that connect task data, learning data, mobility data, and orchestrate that with an agentic layer. And then the final one is change the culture. If you want to get to a skills-based organisation, you need to start to reward adaptability, task agility, and collaboration between human and AI. So the reward structures that we've probably had in the past going forward probably won't be the ones that will get the most and won't drive that cultural change.
Tamsin, have you anything to add there on the leadership? And also, I think the specific challenge for government in terms of moving to this kind of model, you can see the benefits absolutely in terms of, in a practical level, things like the surge and rapid response team, where you're kind of moving people to where the need is. And you could see that being really important to help government be more agile and flexible. But culturally, it's quite a challenge, I think, for government.
Yeah, thank you. There was just an echo. I think that's gone. Thank you. I'm going to start with the sort of culture and leadership point, which is almost, to segue from where Louise finished. So, clearly, in building a skills-based organisation, there is a role for leadership in setting the culture around, a learning environment. So the specific provision of skills-based learning, but it is, setting a culture that allows learning to flow, to share, that this is expected. You can do that. Leaders can do that in a mechanistic way. So there are ways in which you can set up learning loops and bring cross-disciplinary teams together and embed learning as part of that. But that, as we know, when time is at a premium, that there is an opportunity cost of bringing things together and reinforcing that learning. So that's where the point about those sort of cultural signals, what we value, what being articulated about the sort of growth mindset of a department or of a group of people, that this is in service of our strategy, where we're going, we're investing for the future, and there is a sort of expectation that people will take that learning seriously in service of their growth and development. I think the only other thing to add in relation to that clearly there are some specific skill sets that will be important in the future. We've mentioned digital, we've mentioned other things. I think there are a set of leadership skills that will be also very important in a new context. Those are skills about judgment, about collaboration across boundaries. They are skills about having the courage to act, the skills around the courage, the reimagining of a system that is going to work differently, the ability to drive through the change. The incentive structures at the moment do not reward this type of collaboration and cross fertilization of ideas as much as they do. And we know that in order to really think about the reform to public services, we are going to have to source innovation and inspiration from the private sector, from the social sector, from other parts or across the public sector. So the ability to corral a whole different set of ideas and to work across a system are the sorts of specific leadership skills that we think will be needed as part of this investment in building a skills-based civil service.
Thank you. You've already helpfully begun to answer the kind of next question I had, as well as Faiza's question around future skills and where we see lack. Before we dive a bit more into the future digital skills and human skills, Mike, I wonder if I could bring you in on a specific question that someone in the audience has asked around. You mentioned the example of leveraging internal learning. Can you give us an example of that? They've specifically asked, which ties lovely to your point, Tamsin, for cross organisational or collaborative work, but just anything practical you can offer on that would be great.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are lots of examples in different areas, and I think quite frequently the work of the professions in terms of building professional capabilities got some of the best examples of this as well. Departments similarly. I mean, I've seen great examples recently around core skills like writing skills and how to brief effectively, because communication does matter and written communication is critical. But let me reflect on one I've seen that I've been particularly impressed by recently, which is the work of policy and commercial professions in government in introducing the new Procurement Act, Procurement Act 23, which went live obviously fairly recently. Why do I call that out? So obviously it was a great collaboration between lots of different teams and capabilities. There were digital components to it, there's clearly commercial components to it, there's policy elements to it, legislation, so on and so forth. But from a learning point of view, and I believe it has won industry awards for this as well, so I think duly awarded and recognised, it took a very comprehensive approach on making sure that the whole community understood what was going to be going on. So it wasn't just teaching commercial professionals about the new act, it was teaching people in parallel professions. What happens if you work in finance, or you're a project delivery professional, or you're providing assurance? What if you're a supplier to government? What if you're a user of some of these new things? What's different? So there was a great campaign to build awareness. Then there was a level of on-demand knowledge drops, I think they were called, where people could just tap into that when they wanted, and then deep dives to get into the specifics. But what I've been really impressed by is the community of practice that government commercial function put in place around it, because now you can see commercial practitioners and other practitioners exchanging, oh, we've just had this, what do people think about how we might address this question, and consulting with each other across organisational and system boundaries. They're unified by the common cause of introducing the new act and trying to navigate through that in a way that creates the best possible result and impact for government and for our country. But just wonderful to see that going on, and something with a critical deadline. It had to happen. People needed to know how to do that by a date, and just see that executed was wonderful. So I'd call out that as a particular example, but lots of other ones, I say, and apologies if I don't have a chance to talk about all of them.
Well, I think the good one about that example is that I imagine everyone in this organisation, in this audience rather, has a commercial team in their organisation who they could go and speak to and say, tell us about what was happening around the procurement reform. And if they don't know, then you can point them to it and they can learn. So that's great. Thank you, Mike. So skills of the future, obviously that was one question that we've had, and it was also one that you guys have kind of begun to address and begun to raise. I'd like to think about it in two tranches, as it were, the kind of digital and tech skills. How do we think about that when we know that tech is changing so quickly? Like, there's no point learning specifically how to do this one thing when in 5 years' time it will have evolved. What, therefore, should we be thinking about in terms of technical and digital capabilities? Should we start with that one, and then we can think about human skills a bit more? Anyone want to come in on that?
I'll take us back to 2018, which feels like a long time ago. I had the privilege of working with the all-party AI working group, and they presented at one of our offices, and the biggest skill that they said you needed back before COVID, before hybrid working, was that ability to learn. So taking your point, Suzannah, that technology is changing at such a pace, actually almost what you learn is less relevant as long as you are learning and you are being curious. So it's working at such a pace. And the kind of Mike alluded to a kind of a just-in-time learning, or I talk about it as learning in the flow of life, because I don't like the thought that actually work is not part of my life, life isn't part of my work. We're just human beings. So be curious, and actually make sure that you go back to the community point. How do you use your internal networks? Use your internal networks to stimulate your curiosity. What are you learning? Mike, as he's already explained, he's an engineer. If I need to know, like, what agent, what LLM, what SLM should I use, because they're all slightly different, Mike is the person that I go to. So, like, he's my phone a friend, because I know that that is his area of expertise. Similarly, I'll have other colleagues, both within my organisation and in other organisations as well, that I can equally speak to. And just with those kind of conversations, they'll prompt me to recognise my own skills gaps and my own learning gaps. But I think you're quite right. Technology is moving at such a pace.
Yeah, and I guess if I build on that a little bit, I'm feeling as typecast as the computer scientist now. I do very much agree. Learning to learn, that's the skill. That's what you've got to get. But I think foundational knowledge is really important alongside the networks. To come back to where you started, Suzannah, and some of the technical side of things, I believe that everyone in the workforce needs to have certain foundational skills to support this, and that's because technology implementation and AI implementation isn't really, for me, a technology problem anymore. It's a business transformation question. It's not successful when you let a bunch of technical specialists sit in a dark room in isolation from the environment and work stuff up. You have to work in partnership, and to work in partnership, you need to understand the people who you're working with. So I always insist in our teams that everyone is comfortable with data and analysis and understands some of the basics about how you structure information to make it accessible in the world. Similarly, basic digital confidence and skills, fundamental, or fluency. In fact, I think confidence, we're probably a bit past that point now. I think we need to be fluent in these areas. I think the whole AI area, as you say, is moving very quickly, and we work closely with a lot of the vendors of this. I was struck that one of these models, I think it was GPT-4, was introduced in February and then retired in August. So, the concept of rolling out a learning program becomes slightly artificial. You need to be able to tap in. So knowing where to go to learn, as Louise said, that's super important as well. But what you need, I think, more than anything else, is a bit of curiosity. If you're wanting to embrace some of these technologies, I think having a play is a wonderful way of starting to build your own awareness and confidence, get some of the foundational knowledge. It's really important that you think about safety, you think about ethics, you have good judgment, the points that Tamsin was saying earlier on. But I think being curious is really, really important as well. And understanding what others are doing with it and how they're applying it, definitely very, very key. I think people are doing it more than people realise. That was my other reflection. That survey I mentioned, it was quite interesting. We asked people how many people, this is 2 years ago now, which organisations let them use these large language models, ChatGPT and things like that. And it was about 1 in 4, and yet 2/3 of them were using them on a daily basis in the workplace. I think we have stealth learners. That's what I call that community. So people will be curious, and we need to encourage that. As leaders and managers, we need to encourage that curiosity and create then the safe space for them to be able to practice without causing any challenges or issues that could be avoided.
Thank you. Anything else, Tamsin, or anyone else, to come in on a sort of wider professional or technical skills? Because I am conscious that there are other, as we've said, communication, other skills that we would think of as part of our professional life that you think will be really important in the future, before we maybe think about things like empathy and creativity or other more human things.
I was going to just reiterate something that Mike had said, and I wrote down fluency. I don't think that we can lead effectively without actually understanding some of the basic tenets of the technology and the data and the things that underpin it. And I say that because I think that, as Mike has said, it is no longer a technology issue, it's a transformation issue. And like we have to have as leaders a basic understanding of finance, a basic understanding of the context in which we're operating, whether that's the geopolitics or whatever, I don't think you can take strategic decisions or affect a strategy for an organisation, for a business, in the absence of actually understanding what the impact the technology is going to have on the area of work. So I think there is an imperative there beyond just beyond a sort of curiosity mindset, which I also agree with. So they're part of the toolkit now. Clearly, obviously the technology is moving so quickly, so I think there's something about how leaders, teams, managers gain access to that core expertise and capability. So, somebody's doing the investment to stay on top of it, to doing the iteration, but there's a connection back to a core foundational body of learning in order to make wise judgments and to lead effectively.
Thank you. And we're going to sort of come a little bit to audience questions in a moment. So if there are more in your head, audience, do put them in the panel chat, and we'll pick up as many as we can. We have mentioned, I think, some of the skills around creativity, empathy, being more human, being perhaps more playful, being less filtered. I think I might slightly park those, because I think we'll probably bring those up again through the rest of the answers. Before we get to audience, there's one phrase that we used as a group when we were discussing this, which I loved, which was around workplace learning is about individual performance and collective productivity. Louise, would you explore that a little more for us and kind of share what good looks like in that context?
Yeah, thanks, Suzannah. So I think it's important to differentiate, as you say, between that individual performance and collective productivity. And Mike and I have been blessed over the last 10 years in our learning business to look at a lot of data. And one of the things that is quite striking, actually, is that learning efficacy doesn't really vary that much at an individual level, dependent on the format within which it's delivered. So what do I mean? I mean that e-learning, I mean that social learning and face-to-face learning, broadly speaking, evaluates in a similar way. People don't like the flat e-learning quite as much as they like the face-to-face learning. But in terms of, am I going to do my job better, it kind of rates similarly. However, we do still know that for team, collective productivity, you need to have those kind of relationships. It's not just about the domain-specific skill. That will drive your individual productivity. But for collective productivity, this goes back to the point we were just making about knowing where the skills are and recognising your own skills gaps. You need to have a wider lens. And the only way that you can do that is to collectively build capability. So that is through some team performance. It might be about, bringing in some more of that face-to-face activities. So it really is, like I say, getting that balance between the domain individual productivity and the collective responsibility and performance of the team. And it almost goes back to where we started the conversation, where I was talking about the new normals. How do you do line management when you have a very large span of control where you don't meet people? You have to make those social connections so that you understand people as a collective and as a team, rather than just kind of people's individual performance.
Thanks. Tamsin, can I ask you to come in here, because I think obviously there's a really clear role for leaders, as you've been saying, Louisa, to facilitate that connection between individual performance and collective results. What's your reflection on what Louise just said?
Thank you. And I'll also pick up Amanda's question in the chat. So, as we've hinted at, or the sort of theme that's run through as part of this conversation, is the role of leaders in setting a learning culture. And I think the role of leaders is twofold. So, first, to set the culture in which learning is seen as important. And there are lots of ways to signal that and to show up as leaders to reinforce that. And I'll pick that up specifically. But I also think there's a role for leadership to set the strategic parameters within which learning is delivered, which investment in learning is delivered. And by that I mean is if we see that the growth and development of the workforce is a fundamental part of the impact of a department, of a team, of an organisation, and an organisation is going on this trajectory, it needs to become more agile, it needs to become more tech-enabled, it needs to up its performance into public service delivery, whatever the strategic priorities of the organisation, the role of the leader is to set the sort of learning culture and context and investment to serve that goal. They should not be separate. And the leader's role in an position in an organisation is to have that level of oversight of this is learning in service of collective impact, individual growth and development, and which contributes to a thriving and impactful organisation. Now, there are, in response to Amanda's questions, there's lots of ways in which individual leaders can make their learning more visible. And there will be, practices in terms of the time that is allocated to learning. But there are sort of micro behaviours that we see in evidence all of the time. So as soon as, something has happened, what have we learned about that? The sort of reflection, the practice of reflection that a leader can inhabit and instill and role model in an organisation. So there's, the sort of formalised learning and the codification of that, but there are all of the individual behaviours and practices that builds in reflection, builds in insight, fosters the curiosity that we have all alluded to, that just embeds that right at the heart and in the DNA of an organisation.
Thank you. And Mike, sorry. You go.
Maybe to amplify that quickly, I very much agree with what Tamsin said. The role of the leader is very much role modelling. It's creating that space to learn, if you will. There are some things like, as a manager, not telling people they can't go on that training course because there's a really important deliverable. You need to be seen to prioritise learning so that it is valued. And it should feature in sort of annual reviews and performance conversations as well. But I believe in role modelling. One thing that we do is we start each of our weekly meetings with a "What have we learnt this week?" It's a moment of reflection to share, and it's just getting in the habit, and it's putting it into the mind and the DNA that each week we should be thinking about what we've learned. I actually find that reflective process quite helpful, actually, to consolidate my own learning as well. So I think there's just some practical things like that we should be talking and doing.
Thanks, Mike. Louise, could I ask you to kick us off with the next question that's come in around how leaders can implement innovative learning interventions? You might want to take that in. How can leaders implement something that's new and that people might be resistant to, or maybe just reflections on actually what does an innovative learning intervention look like from your experience working across different organisations?
Yeah, thanks, Suzannah. So to start off, I think what leaders need to do is probably also answers Gabriel's question about making learning more effective, is they absolutely need to know what are they trying to change? What's the business imperative? Because actually, there's a lot of tech out there that you can use to create learning, to engage in learning. But if you don't know why you're doing it and you haven't thought, so you have to start off with the end in mind. What do you want to change? How are you going to evaluate it? How will you know if you've made a difference? So hopefully that partly answers Gabriel's question as well. Think about the end in mind. That is how you will make it more effective. And of course, all learning should be accessible. There are guidelines that to be complied to. And then going back to the question of leaders implementing more innovative learning interventions, I sometimes think that innovation always gets put together with technology and actually doesn't have to be technologically focused. You could have something that's highly experiential, that's role play, that's action learning, actually, that takes you on a very good learning journey. But let's assume that we do want to use some tech to drive the innovation. For the leaders' point to me is again to justify the spend on that technology. So, if you're going to get, the kind of the Google glasses, that type of thing to play with, then, that's an enormous amount of expense. You've got to know that actually where you're going to go and what you're going to get from that is worth the investment in time. That, using some e-learning or using a face-to-face seminar style session might not also implement. But yeah, there's lots of things we're doing, a lot of scenario-based learning, a lot of role-play based learning, and you can do that digitally, you can do it socially on a Teams platform. It doesn't need to be face-to-face, but that is kind of at the far end of innovation. In terms of kind of immersion, like say you can use the kind of VR headsets if you want to do some immersion. I can imagine that some of your more ops-style professions where they're actually kind of in places, maybe your border forces, that might be something that was really more useful, where you actually can immerse yourself in a different scenario. But yeah, my ultimate goal is that the role of the leader in that is to be able to justify, start with the end in mind.
Anything to add, Mike or Tamsin, on kind of innovation in this context before we come to our kind of final questions and final remarks?
Thank you. Just a very simple point. So, there's clearly loads of potential innovations that AI opens us up to. There are some really simple things that we can be doing. And I think, one of the challenges for, the civil service writ large is to bring in different types of perspectives, to challenge assumptions, to offer inspiration and different ways of doing it. And so there's some sort of almost classic bits of the toolkit that can be applied that doesn't need tech innovation, but things like learning exchanges, internships, sabbaticals, just as a way of flowing new ideas through the system. And we know that when a system is under stress and when time is poor, we hunker down and we don't look up and out. And so I think, there is something about the approaching something as a system and from a different perspective that can be satisfied and delivered through some quite sort of established mechanisms around sabbaticals, exchanges, etc. So that would be an additional view to the tech-based view of innovation.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly find myself when I'm trying to write about innovation, tech gets driven to me all the time. I love tech, but there is innovation beyond tech. There is a question in there around AI offer. I mean, I know that one big thing is focusing on AI this time round. So I know there will be lots of learning out there around AI being driven from the Cabinet Office team, from the GDS team. I don't know if we have time to kind of go into details, but what we could maybe do is follow up, if possible, when we will send you. Oh, here we go. Have you already posted something there for us, Mike? Someone has.
I just shared a couple of links.
I was going to send you that, and we'll follow it in the email. We will include it in the follow-up email as well for those people who are not on. But just I would like to ask, in the kind of spirit of the question around leaders kind of making their learning visible, and in terms of setting that example of and setting a learning culture. And in our final 5 minutes, I would like to ask each of you, experts on learning and leadership development, to share one piece of advice for our audience, how they might improve their own learning practice. We've spoken a lot about collective and team learning, but for the people watching, how could they improve their own learning practice in the next, few months? Mike, do you want to go first with a bit of advice?
I feel we've touched quite a lot on a lot of the things I would call out already. Protecting the time to make sure that you're not just learning and applying, but reflecting on what you've learned as well. That's where, from a cognitive science point of view, that's where it really sticks and gels in your mind. I love reading articles. That's how I absorb a lot of knowledge. So, I don't necessarily need to go and do a piece of digital learning, attend a course, but I actually discuss it with colleagues. That's part of my reflective process. And I also just like to sort of take notes and think what I'm going to do differently. I think that's the second thing, is get into the habit of checking in with yourself. If you set yourself an objective to learn a thing, take the time to think in 3 months' time, did I actually do that or not? I'm probably one of many people who occasionally guiltily find that I haven't quite done what I committed to myself I was going to do. So it's a good way of keeping me very much on point. And as we said before, remain curious. Whenever I see something or come across something, I try and ask why, why, how, what could I do differently around this? Where else could I apply this? And going through that process of understanding and sharing, I find really helpful too. So that's me.
Thank you, Mike. Tamsin, how about you? Thoughts for the audience on their own learning practice?
Thank you. So I've got 3, and you might get some repetition on the panel. So my first one was reflection. I think it is a really fundamentally important tool in terms of promoting learning, and but find the reflective practice that works for you. I don't write a diary, I don't journal particularly, but I build into a sort of, there are moments in my day when I think, or at the end of the week, what have we learned from this week? What's happened? How do I make sense of it? What would I do differently? What would, so those sorts of questions and prompts to ask yourself, whether it's something specific about codified learning or in the round of how you're doing things, I think find your own reflective practice would be advice number 1. I think the second bit of advice would be to reframe in your mind the purpose of your learning. Because I think what we find or what we observe is that learning becomes marginalised, or is the thing that drops off the edge of the desk when people are busy. Oh, it's just too hard to read that article. It's just too hard to do that. I haven't got time. I've got a whole set of competing priorities. So I think it's for me, it's about reframing why we are investing in learning. And ultimately, we're investing in our own learning and the learning of our people, because we need them to grow, and there is and acquire new skills so they are fit for, they are ready for the future and the changing landscape in which they find themselves in. And then that becomes a really strategic imperative. That is not something that drops off the side of the desk. It's a real absolute imperative for the workforce, for us as individuals to grow with that sort of mindset. So it's reframe the reason. And I guess then my third thing is around role modelling. I think your impact, whatever role that you're playing, the impact that you can have in terms of the rituals and practice about learning, to drive reflection, to capture insights, to bring in different perspectives, can have a transformative effect. So there's a combination of personal and practice things, as well as okay, why are we doing this? What's it in service of? And it's part of a bigger strategic piece.
Thank you. And Louise, you kicked us off with the panel introductions. Do you want to sum up for us with the final thoughts on how our audience can improve their learning practice?
Yeah, I think it is about repetition and about routine, actually. So just make it part of your routine. So we're all into, we need to drink more water, we need to stay hydrated. It's exactly the same, particularly with AI. AI is very good at processing. We need to be even better. So just make it part of your routine. And I guess just quick tip from me, and again, the neuroscience supports this, is the sooner you test yourself in terms of, I'm not just reading something, but now I'm going to write down, what are the 5 things I learned? I'm not going to look at that. I'm just going to, write it down. I use my phone as a way of just summarising in my notes page, actually. I've listened to a podcast, what are my key takeaways? And so I'm not quite journaling, but I am quite testing myself. And then, of course, then I can go back, when I'm reversing my commute at the end of the day, and just reinforce that learning. So routine and reinforcement.
Thank you, Louise, and thank you to all of you. This has been, I think, a really lovely discussion, a mix of thought-provoking, future-looking, but also some really practical stuff for our audience. Thank you to the audience for taking part, for your questions, and I wish all of you a very good Tuesday. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for listening to the Civil Service World podcast. Do subscribe so you'll get the next episode right in your feed, along with a range of other informed and informative podcasts from the CSW team.